Forget waiting for some sign from the stars. What if we could just pick up the phone and make the call ourselves? Well, that's pretty much the core idea behind this fascinating and, let's be honest, controversial movement called CE5. It claims that human consciousness itself is the key to initiating contact. So today, we're going to unpack the theory, look at the alleged proof, and explore what it could all mean for our place in the cosmos. So here's our game plan. First, we'll quickly define what a close encounter even is. Then, we'll dive into the pretty wild idea that consciousness is our cosmic telephone. After that, we'll look at some of the alleged events people claim have happened, and we'll wrap up by asking, what does this all mean for the future of humanity? All right, first things first. Before we can even touch on the fifth kind of close encounter, we really need to get a handle on the first four. This is the classic scale that kind of sets the stage for everything else we're going to talk about. So this scale, which was partly developed by Dr. J. Allen Hynek, it outlines a clear progression, right? The first four kinds are totally passive. They're things that happen to you. You see a craft, you find some weird traces on the ground, you see a being, or maybe you even have an experience on a craft. But the fifth kind, CE5, that is a completely different ballgame. And this is the whole point. CE5 completely flips the script. It takes us from being passive observers, just waiting for something to happen, to being active participants who are intentionally reaching out. It's the difference between seeing a ship sail past in the distance and, lighting a signal fire on the shore to get its attention. Okay, so this raises a huge question, right? If we can actually initiate contact, how in the world do we do it? Well, according to the source material, the answer isn't in our telescopes or our rockets, it's in our minds. The central claim here is that we've been thinking about alien communication all wrong. The source argues that any civilization that can zip across galaxies isn't going to be using radio waves. I mean, that's technology from the 1800s. It's limited by the speed of light. The theory is that they'd be using something that's instantaneous, something that operates outside of space and time, the actual physics of consciousness. And this brings us to the core concept, something the source calls field consciousness. Now, try to picture it like this. Your own awareness, your consciousness, it isn't just some chemical reaction stuck inside your skull. Instead, it's more like a radio receiver that's tuned into a universal broadcast, a massive, omnipresent field of consciousness that connects everything everywhere. And according to this idea, the secret to communication is learning how to tune in. And to show the supposed power of this field, the source points to studies on things like mass meditation. The claim is that when as little as 1% of a population meditates with the same intention, it can create a real, measurable field effect that can actually influence the other 99%, leading to things like drops in crime rates. Now, whether you buy the data or not, the idea that consciousness can have a collective, tangible impact is pretty wild. So, okay, if that's the theory, what does it look like in practice? How do people supposedly do this? Let's take a look at the actual protocol the source material lays out and some of the really extraordinary events that practitioners claim have happened because of it. The protocol itself is this really interesting mix of the spiritual and the practical. Step 1 is meditation. The goal is to quiet your mind and tap into that universal consciousness field, but it doesn't stop there. Then they use technology to basically amplify the signal. They play specific audio tones, and they use a laser to point to a very specific spot in the sky, basically sending a giant flashing, "Hey, we're right here," to anyone who might be listening on this cosmic network. All right, let's dig into one of the most detailed stories from the source material. This one involves an encounter down in Arizona with a being that eventually became known as the Healer. The way this encounter is described is just fascinating. So the group is meditating, and suddenly several of them hear these distinct footsteps coming up behind them. But here's the thing. There's nothing there. No one's visible to the naked eye. So they point a camera towards the sound, and right at the moment the photo is snapped, this red sphere of light reportedly just appears. The photo they got, which they claim is completely unretouched, is said to show this non-human figure. But a strange photograph isn't even the end of the story. The speaker alleges that this specific being became associated with multiple, medically unexplainable healings. And maybe the most striking example they cite is about a man in the group who had severe hearing loss for 50 years. According to the story, after the main event, he stayed behind and silently asked this being for help. The claim is that the very next morning, he woke up with his hearing completely restored. Now for another case from the source material. This one takes us out to Joshua Tree National Park, where a whole different kind of encounter was apparently documented. So in this event, it started with sound again. Participants heard what sounded like voices. Someone snapped a photo toward the sound, and it captured this cone of light, and inside it, a small figure, apparently waving. But then it got even weirder. Electronic equipment that had no internet, no cell service, allegedly started responding to their questions with clear yes and no signals. So what's the end game here? Where does all this lead? Beyond these incredible claims of individual encounters, the source material argues that this whole concept has massive implications for the future of our species. This quote right here, this really gets to the heart of the whole CE5 movement. The argument is that for centuries, we've thought the final frontier was outer space. But this philosophy suggests we've been looking in the wrong direction. That the greatest, most important journey isn't outward to the stars, but inward, into the massive, unexplored universe of consciousness itself. The logic here is that all of our conflicts, our wars, our divisions, they all come from focusing on what makes us different. The source argues that even uniting around our shared humanity isn't enough in a universe that might be filled with non-human intelligence. The only true common ground, the only possible foundation for a lasting universal peace is the one thing all sentient life shares, that field of consciousness. And this idea gets summed up perfectly in this motto. It's about reframing our whole identity, not by our nation or even by our planet, but on a truly cosmic scale. It suggests that the people of the universe are all beings who share in the light of consciousness. So, in the end, the claims around CE5 push us to ask some really fundamental questions. I mean, whether you see all this as science or spirituality or just plain science fiction, it forces you to think about what it even means to be aware, and to wonder if that awareness might just be our final and most important frontier.